Is Bernie Sanders actually a democratic socialist? What even is that? I'm Nathan Seelove, and this is Factually Biased. So my last video was quite a ecstatic endorsement of Bernie Sanders. And I addressed a lot of counter-arguments to Bernie Sanders, and I addressed a lot of the reasons why a lot of people think that he is not the best choice. But there is one that I left out, and that's because I think this is worthy of its own video. And that is, Bernie Sanders is a socialist, and therefore bad. And one of the things that he often says when people say that is, well, I'm not a socialist, I'm a democratic socialist, to which the counter-argument is usually, well, democratic socialism is just socialism that you choose. Now, there are aspects of this argument that are red herring, and there are aspects of this argument that is straw manning. And in order to understand exactly what those aspects are and to understand what Bernie Sanders actually is, we need to understand three terms, and that is socialism, democratic socialism, and social democracy. So before I get into this, I would just like to quickly make one thing clear. I consider myself a social democrat, not a socialist, not a democratic socialist, a social democrat. And if anybody ever tries to use this video as some kind of argument for what as some kind of argument for what I am, if someone tries to use this video to frame me as a socialist or a democratic socialist, you are a dishonest actor. You are not actually presenting my actual ideology. You are not intellectually honest. So, now that that's out of the way, let's go over what socialism actually is first. So, socialism is defined as a political or economic theory of social organization that advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchange be owned or regulated by the community as a whole. So what that means is that the community as a whole can take several forms. Sometimes it means that the means of production are controlled by the consumers. Sometimes it means that it is controlled by the employees. Sometimes, and actually most of the time, when the word socialism has been used throughout history, it has taken the form of a governing entity. Now, that governing entity, ideally, according to the definition of socialism, should be one that is owned by the community as a whole. Now, that is often not the case, which is where you get things like authoritarian socialism, which is basically what Venezuela is, it's what the USSR was, and that is where not only does the government control the means of production, but they also control people's lives. And a lot of people that consider themselves socialists would say that that is a twisted form of socialism, but that's why we create the caveat of this is authoritarian socialism. Now, that's not necessarily what all socialism is. All socialism does not necessarily mean that the government controls everything. Ideally, socialism is about the government controlling the means of production, not necessarily people's lives. So that gets us into democratic socialism. So democratic socialism is specifically a system in which, yes, the government does control the means of production, but it is a democratically elected government, which means that you still do have the opportunity for personal freedoms. No matter, it is a clarification that there is personal freedoms, and it is a circumstance in which people still elect their leaders. Now, one important thing to clarify about both democratic socialism and socialism is that they do operate off of a post-capitalist model. They aren't capitalism. Now, Bernie Sanders refers to himself as a democratic socialist. So, by the definition of democratic socialism, he would be someone that would advocate for a post-capitalist society. Except he doesn't. In fact, a lot of the things that he advocates for, advocating for a strong social safety net, a minimum wage, are aspects of something else that we call social democracy. So social democracy is basically a mix of socialism and capitalism, and theoretically, it's supposed to integrate the best aspects of both. So a lot of people argue that capitalism is good because it encourages innovation, because if you let people freely think about ideas for innovation, that people will be motivated to continue to progress and to continue to make a product or service better. And it combines that with the promises of socialism that everybody have a certain amount of economic equality, or at least that they're taken care of. So a social democracy could mean that you have your healthcare taken care of. You don't need to have, you don't have to worry about if you get sick, going bankrupt, or losing your job, or it completely draining your bank account. It could also take it could also take on universal college education. So one of the driving factors of social mobility is education. So if a person is able to have access to a college education, they're more likely to end up in a higher socioeconomic status than the one that they were born with. So this sounds a lot more like what Bernie Sanders actually advocates for. Now, I'm not the first person that has pointed out that Bernie Sanders' ideology falls much more in line with social democracy than democratic socialism, but I think that it's worth saying that we've gotten to the point where the term democratic socialism has started to be used so interchangeably with social democracy that most of the people that you will find today that refer to themselves as democratic socialists, Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, are actually social democrats, because a lot of what they say does not actually advocate for a post-capitalist society. What's more important than utilizing some kind of political identity as a means of casting a dark shadow on the economic arguments that a person is making is that to instead focus on those arguments themselves. So don't make an argument against Medicare for all because it is socialist. Make an argument based on the actual merits. Now, if the same reasons why you don't like the idea of socialism are the same reasons why you don't like the idea of Medicare for all, you're someone that thinks that we need a small government and I don't want the government to pay for healthcare, then make that argument. But don't make the argument that it's bad because socialism, because that is an annoying shortcut that allows you to get around having an actual conversation, allows you to get around having actual discourse, and you're never going to get anywhere with it. Because we've gotten to the point where when most people think about the word socialism or democratic socialism, they think about social democracies like Denmark, like Sweden, like Finland. That's what they think about. Now, you can try to say, well, but what about Venezuela? They're socialist and everything went badly for them. But that's not what people are thinking about. People aren't thinking about Venezuela because that's an example of authoritarian socialism. That's not what people are advocating for. That's not what people are arguing for. So whether you are a conservative or liberal, a democratic socialist, a socialist, a social democrat, I think that at the end of the day, what matters is the policy itself and the merits of that policy. And if you support a policy just because you identify with the ideology that is associated with that policy, that is a logically fallacious reason to identify with that policy. Well, that's today's video. Thank you all for watching. If you liked this video, please give it a like, a share, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Check out some of my other stuff, and I will see you next week.